Welcome back. In this final part of our classes, we are going to still consider something related to the simple past passive voice, but we are going to add this effect or this characteristic that I mentioned you the previous class. The preposition by, talking about the agent or the subject, the one that causes the action. So let's remember this. When to use passive voice. Let's get this example that gives us a clearer idea of this. Francisco Pizarro founded Lima in 1535. As we know by history, this is what happened in that time, and this is the active voice. Francisco Pizarro did the action. Lima received the action. If we change this into passive voice, we can say Lima was founded by Francisco Pizarro in 1535. But what happens to this sentence? Pizarro is still who did the action. Lima still received the action, but the focus of my attention changes to be the object, the most important part of my sentence. But if you want, you cannot mention Francisco Pizarro. You can say Lima was founded in 1535. So Pizarro still did the action, but we do not mention them. So the passive comes from the active only with transitive verbs. That's something that you have to remember all the time. When do we use by? So let's go over these examples. You get one classical example in all the books that talk about this. Romeo and Juliet was written by William Shakespeare. You see the letters that are, the words that are marked in red. Was written by. And probably you see in many movies or poems or many other documents, it says written by, produced by. It means that the preposition by is used to identify the subject, the doer, the agent, the one who caused that action to happen. But Romeo and Juliet is still the object of my sentence. But for this sentence, it is receiving principal attention. The Statue of Liberty was designed by Bartholdi. It was an Italian designer. Together with other people, he designed and helped to create the Statue of Liberty. But I don't want to mention him as the principal actor, even though he is the principal actor. But the focus of my attention is on the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty was designed. By whom? By Bartholdi. The Twin Towers were destroyed by plane crashes. Remember September 11, 2001? So there were accidents, or we don't know what was the cause, but the Twin Towers were destroyed by plane crashes. That by describes who caused or what caused the destruction of the Twin Towers. So in this case, we use by to indicate who did the action. But it is still not our focus of attention. It's only to mention it, to indicate it. The focus of my attention is Romeo and Juliet, the Statue of Liberty, the Twin Towers. So if we want to use this in the passive voice, we can also make a mix of uses with these adverbs of intensity. You see, the car was seriously damaged after the crash. There was a crash, maybe the driver got asleep, fell asleep, and then there was an accident and a crash. So the car was seriously damaged. It was not only damaged, but it was seriously damaged. Remember, these adverbs, seriously, dramatically, temporarily, importantly, perfectly, those are intensity adverbs that gives us a better idea of how the effect was on the object. Those tourists were dramatically affected by the accident. So probably there were tourists in the car. So those tourists were dramatically affected. The accident affected them, but it was dramatically. So I say those tourists were dramatically affected. Or electricity was temporarily cut while they were trying to control the fire. Remember, some time ago there was a fire in Lima, So while the firefighters, while they were trying to control the fire, the electricity was temporarily cut. That means that I am giving an intensity temporarily, not all day, probably some 6 or 7 hours, but it was temporarily cut. These adverbs of intensity are used to emphasize the effects of what the subject did to the object. But remember, the object is still the object. The subject is still the subject. I am only trying to change the focus of attention. Look at these examples to get this idea closer. The exposers were seriously questioned after the presentation. Seriously questioned. Who questioned these exposers? The public, the people who were listening to them, questioned the exposers, but we are not mentioning them. You see, they were seriously questioned. But if you want to mention them, of course, you use, as we said at the beginning, the preposition by. Machu Picchu was built by the Incas 1,000 years ago. So what do we say? Machu Picchu was built by the Incas. We are mentioning that the Incas built Machu Picchu, but the focus is not on the Incas. The focus is on Machu Picchu. So the passive voice is not a change of position. It only changes the focus that the object receives in our attention. So that's what you have to remember. Passive voice, active voice. Active, the focus is on the subject. Passive, the focus is on the object. Thank you very much.